I want to talk about the war in Ukraine, but from a different spin, not because I want to diminish it, God forbid. It is horrific. It is an evil, immoral war. There is no justification for the hesitation of our government and the governments of Europe, the governments of democracies, for not supporting Ukraine more than just with sanctions, but with military help, military intervention, to a certain degree. Defensive positions don't have to go ahead and aggressively shoot down Russian planes. You can prevent, you can say that if you're going to attack buildings, we're going to go attack the missiles, and we're going to have defensive missiles like Patriot missiles, and then if necessary, we'll go after the missile batteries to prevent further civilian deaths. You don't have to go ahead and engage them in an aggressive war, but in a defensive position. At any rate, that's my opinion. I don't understand why the government of this country and other countries are not aggressive enough to stand up to the Russian bear. The Russian bear is not Superman, and yes, he has nuclear weapons, but as long as the position of the other nations, the brother nations to Ukraine, will be of a defensive nature to protect civilians from death and destruction, to allow the movement of civilians to safety, that I don't believe that this would create an escalation in the war. That being said, I want to give you a hypothetical. Imagine this war drags on for months and maybe years, and then Putin decides that he wishes to make the area of Ukraine Ukrainian. He doesn't want to have any Ukrainians in this territory. Again, he has got millions of Russians who live nearby or live within the borders of Ukraine. He doesn't want any ethnic Ukrainians staying on this land, and he makes a position that he will push them all out or kill them. In the meantime, the world has had a terrible lack of energy, and they are forced once again to purchase oil and gas from Putin. And as the price for getting more oil and gas is supporting Putin's program, which is to subjugate the Ukrainians, and he forbids those countries getting his gas and oil from accepting refugees from Ukraine. All of a sudden, a certain area in Eurasia, near the Aral Sea, opens up, and a group of people decide that it's a good place for Ukrainian refugees, and somehow or other Putin agrees that Ukrainian refugees, 10 million of them, are allowed to enter this area in Central Asia, near, not too far from the Ural Mountains, but in Central Asia. The only problem with that is it can be a Ukrainian area, but living in that Ukrainian area are people who are either Russian or had Russian citizenship. And they live in that area, and they're forbidden from Ukrainians who are going to get new Ukraine in Central Asia, are forbidden from forcing the ethnic Russians or the ethnic Siberians out of their homes, and they have to live with them. And these Russians or Siberians are very anti-Ukrainian. And they engage in bombings, murders, and all the subversive activities trying to get rid of this forced new Ukraine from them. New Ukraine decides that it is a haven for other Ukrainians because nobody else in Europe wants them. And even the United States, which at one time had an open door policy, decides that there are just too many of them. They don't want any more Ukrainians. The only place for the Ukrainian refugees is in New Ukraine and Central Asia. They develop a system of government. They have Russians, ethnic Russians who live there side by side in some of their cities. And the ethnic Russians are sworn to destroy this this newly imposed Ukrainian country upon them, and they swear to destroy it. Would you, a liberal Jew, support New Ukraine? Would you also support New Ukraine's efforts to replant the refugees, more refugees that are coming out of Ukraine that have no other place to go? Would you support their efforts in repopulating, to bring the Ukrainian refugees to their area? Would you also understand that the Russians and the Siberians who were there before hate the Ukrainians and therefore cannot be treated just as some minority? They have to be treated as hostile warriors, a potentially hostile army. And as a result of that, there will be certain standards that will have to be imposed upon the Russian population and the Siberian population to ensure the safety and well-being of the Ukrainian refugees. Certainly, after seeing what has taken place under Putin's attacks, no one in their right minds would accuse the Ukrainians that have survived the attacks of Putin and the ethnic cleansing of Putin. Certainly nobody would accuse them of being paranoid and being apartheid. Because all they're doing is making sure that Ukrainians can live in peace and in harmony, and whatever restrictions they have on the Russians, who have a history of attacking them and a desire to cleanse out any area where there are Ukrainians, to destroy the Ukrainians. Nobody could blame the Ukrainians for treating the Russians and the Siberians with suspicion and not allow them certain accesses to, not just to government. They might get access to government, but not access to military, access to every benefit that the Ukrainians have fought hard for to reestablish themselves. Nobody would accuse the new Ukrainians of being racist or being small-minded and not having compassion upon people who are sworn to destroy them. After all, look at what they had to live through. Right? J Street, BeTzelem. Look how despicable you are. The Jewish people had no place to run during World War II. almost 1,000 Jews try to save themselves on a boat called the St. Louis. And no one in the Americans wanted them, men, women, and children. They were running away from occupied Europe. They all were murdered by the Nazis. Jews who tried to escape from Nazi Germany's hell were torpedoed in their efforts to come to the land which is their homeland, the land of Israel. I don't know how many thousands of Jews wound up at the bottom of the Mediterranean by the torpedoes of the English. The English were not tzaddikim, righteous people during World War II, and neither were the United States of America. The United States of America battled against evil, but it did so without concern of the most persecuted people on earth. They did not try to save them. Only at the end of the war, when most of the vast majority of the people were murdered, did they express any compassion for the survivors. There is only one place in the world where a Jew who is persecuted is welcome without any conditions. And in that area are hostile elements that have tried to destroy Jews at one time or another. The so-called Palestinians, they didn't call themselves Palestinians till much later. Jews were called Palestinians. The Arabs called themselves by other names. The so-called Palestinians are sworn to the destruction of the Jewish state. And that's been consistent. Even when there was no state, they swore to eradicate Jews from coming into the land of Israel. This is the only place that would accept them. And this has been consistent. Consistent in their ideology, consistent in what they teach their children. They teach their children to kill and destroy and blow up Yahud, the Jews. Atbach al Yehud, slaughter the Jews. Now, for the Ukrainians, you would not accuse them of apartheid, despite the fact that their persecution by the Russians is not as dramatic and it is horrible, but it's not as ideological, not as systematic as the Holocaust and the designs of some of the Muslim brotherhoods, the Hezbollah, Hamas, and all of the other radical Muslim, and there's no such thing as radical Islam. Islam is anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. The final position of Muhammad is that ultimately they have to destroy those people. If they imposed dhimmi taxes and so on and so forth, but that was a temporary measure. Ultimately, they say there will be the day of Al-Aqsa. The day of Al-Aqsa will be when the rocks will say, or the wall will say, there's a Jew behind me, go kill him. And there will be a great celebration when they will kill out all the Jews. It's called the day of Al-Aqsa. Temple Mount is called Al-Aqsa Mount. That's what they think. By taking over the Temple Mount, they will ultimately destroy all the Jews. That's the ideology. But aren't there moderates? Yeah. There are moderates. But not in the PA. Not in the Palestinian Authority. their entire constitution, their declaration of of their principles, has with it the destruction of the Jewish state. Can you not understand that we cannot make reasonable peace with these people, A, and B, as long as they're in this political position of destroying anything that's Jewish, you should understand that we cannot give them equal rights and equal access. You can't give a murderer a knife or a gun, because history has shown that he will use it against you. How do you know? Maybe he'll stop. Maybe he'll change. Can a zebra change his stripes? Can a leopard change his spots? They've been doing this for about 1,300 years. The Jews numbered far greater numbers, far greater percentages in the Middle East at the time of Muhammad. Forced conversion and murder is what caused the Jews of that area to become such a small minority. Between 500,000 and 1 million Jews were forced out of their homes in the Arab nations around Israel after Israel was established. Their wealth was confiscated. They were lucky to have actually escaped with their lives. Some instances, they weren't so fortunate. This is the sad history of Jews with Arab neighbors in Arab countries, living under Sharia law, living under the dhimmi condition. It's a very sad and painful history. J Street and BeTzelem want us to go back to dhimmihood. They have no appreciation of history, of Jewish history and Jewish suffering. Certainly, the way I presented the story of Ukraine should shed light on how the Jews of Israel should be treated and should be looked at. Instead of supporting BDS, they should support the development, the expansion, Jewish industry, Jewish brains, and without which much of the Middle East would not have the chips for computers, no medicines, no water treatments, desalination. The genius and the entrepreneurship of the Jewish state is an incredible engine that could bring benefit not just to Israel, but to all of their Arab neighbors if they would make peace with us, if they would accept the possibility that another nation that doesn't believe like them can exist side by side with them. Unfortunately, I don't believe this is possible. But until it can become possible, Israel has no choice. They have no more choice than the hypothetical ethnic Ukrainians living in New Ukraine with a hostile Russian population. BeTzelem isn't, and J Street is really M Street.